The hum of the engines was oddly soothing, like a lullaby sung in metal and air. Ava sat beside me, her tiny legs swinging beneath the seat as she pressed her nose to the window, tracing invisible shapes in the clouds with her finger. She loved flying. Ever since she was old enough to talk, she'd tell everyone that her daddy flew planes like a superhero. I smiled, watching her blonde curls bounce each time she turned to point something out I couldn't see. Our seats were near the middle of the plane, economy class, aisle and window. Ava wanted the window, of course. I didn't mind being squished in the middle. After the hectic morning of packing, security lines, and snack negotiations, it felt like a win just to be seated and breathing. We were headed to Phoenix to visit my sister for her baby shower. It was going to be a girls' trip. Just me and Ava this time. My husband, Mark, was already working this flight. He wasn't supposed to be flying today, but a schedule change 2 days ago had him piloting this exact route. The airline tried to put us on a later flight, but Mark pulled a few strings. I still hadn't told Ava he was in the cockpit. I wanted it to be a surprise when we landed. Across the aisle, a woman in a beige sweater sighed loudly. She'd already flagged down a flight attendant to complain about her seatbelt. Her voice carried a shrill edge I recognized but couldn't quite place. I glanced at her again. Her face felt familiar. Sharp jaw. Too much perfume. She caught me looking and narrowed her eyes. I turned back to Ava and pretended everything was perfectly ordinary. I remembered her the moment she opened her mouth again, this time snapping at a teenage boy who dared recline his seat. Her name was Linda, though she insisted everyone call her Mrs. Cartwright. Back home, she was the president of our neighborhood HOA, a title she wielded like a badge of honor and a weapon all in one. She had fined us twice in the last year. Once for leaving our garbage bins out past noon, and once because Ava had drawn flowers in chalk on the driveway. I had laughed the first time. The second time, not so much. Now here she was, just a few rows ahead, her hair shellacked into place, her arms crossed like she was holding court in her castle. She wore that same thin-lipped scowl I had seen countless times at neighborhood meetings and mailbox encounters. I hadn't recognized her right away. Without her sunglasses and clipboard, she almost passed for a regular person. She turned around at one point, eyes scanning the cabin like a prison warden doing a count. When she saw Ava whispering something to her stuffed unicorn, she rolled her eyes and muttered something under her breath. I leaned forward, pretending to reach for my bag, and caught a better look at her. It was her, all right. I would have bet my mortgage on it. Ava hadn't noticed. She was too busy telling her unicorn about the clouds. I debated whether to say something, to make small talk, or just keep quiet and pray the flight stayed uneventful. Linda didn't recognize me yet, which felt like a blessing. She turned back around and hit the call button for the second time in 10 minutes. I let out a breath and silently begged the universe to keep her busy with someone else. It started with the seat-kicking accusation. Linda shot up in her seat, twisting around so fast her neck scarf came loose. She stared directly at Ava, who was humming and drawing shapes on the window. Without even addressing me, she launched into a sharp reprimand, her voice slicing through the white noise of the cabin. "Tell your daughter to stop kicking my seat. It's incredibly rude." I blinked, caught off guard. Ava looked up, confused, her little legs tucked nowhere near the seat in front of her. I opened my mouth, then shut it, trying to stay calm. "She hasn't touched your seat. She's been looking out the window." Linda scoffed and turned back around. A few heads had turned, but no one said anything. I leaned down to whisper to Ava, told her she was doing fine and not to worry. She nodded and returned to her drawings, though the smile on her face had faded a little. 15 minutes later, Linda struck again. This time, she stood up and pointed toward us. This is exactly the kind of parenting that ruins public spaces. No boundaries, no discipline. You people let your children act like animals. It wasn't the volume of her voice, but the way she said it that turned the aisle cold. A flight attendant appeared, her voice smooth and practiced. She asked Linda to take her seat. Linda obeyed, but not without another cutting look in our direction. I could feel my heart climbing up my throat. The old fury I used to feel when she'd cite obscure HOA rules about trash can lids and mailbox paint started to rise again. But this was different. This wasn't a petty warning taped to my door. This was my daughter, and we were thousands of feet in the air with nowhere to go. Ava sank lower in her seat and whispered that she was scared of the mean lady. I told her I wouldn't let anything happen. I reached for the call button myself, but stopped. I didn't want to escalate it. I thought maybe if I kept quiet, if I didn't provoke her, she'd just fall asleep or focus on something else. I didn't realize then that Linda hadn't come on this flight to relax. We moved into the neighborhood 3 years ago, thinking it would be the perfect place to raise Ava. Tree-lined streets, friendly porches, good schools. It felt like a promise. What we didn't realize was that Linda Cartwright came with the deal. She lived 3 doors down and ran the homeowners association like it was a private kingdom. On the surface, she was polite enough, but her smile was never real. It was the kind that curled at the edges without ever reaching her eyes. It started with a letter, a warning about our garbage bins being left at the curb, past the approved retrieval hour. Then another letter came about the color of our front door, which apparently deviated slightly from the HOA-approved palette. I thought it was a mistake. I painted it myself, just a shade of deep blue. Linda showed up the next morning with a laminated handbook and a swatch sample. Ava was only 5 when she learned what an HOA was. She had drawn a chalk rainbow on the sidewalk one afternoon, a bright, messy thing stretching across our walkway. It had taken her nearly an hour. She was proud. Linda came by while Ava was still finishing the last cloud and said the chalk needed to be washed off immediately. She called it graffiti. Ava cried while I hosed it down. Mark tried to reason with her once. He showed up at a community meeting to speak about the way she handled minor violations. Linda smiled through his entire speech, then fined us for unauthorized landscaping the following week. We had trimmed a bush without submitting a form. Over time, most of our neighbors stopped fighting back. Some even defended her, saying she kept the neighborhood in order. I learned to bite my tongue, to go through the motions. But every time I saw her strutting around the cul-de-sac, clipboard in hand, I wondered how someone could be so proud of making other people miserable. Ava once asked if Mrs. Cartwright was a witch. I told her no, but part of me wasn't sure. She stood up again about halfway through the flight. The fastened seatbelt sign was still lit, but Linda didn't seem to care. She moved with a stiff, deliberate energy, walking up the aisle like she was inspecting something. Her eyes landed on Ava more than once. I noticed her hands were shaking slightly, her fingers twitching as she held onto the overhead bins for balance. One of the flight attendants asked her to return to her seat. She nodded, mumbled something no one could hear, and turned around. When she passed by us, she paused. I could smell her perfume again, too sweet and cloying. She stared down at Ava without saying a word. Her face looked empty, hollowed out, like something had drained all the warmth from it. Then she moved on and disappeared behind the curtain near the galley. I watched the curtain for a minute. I had a bad feeling, the kind you can't explain with logic. It sat in my chest like a stone. I looked at Ava, who was now curled against her seat, coloring quietly. I leaned over and kissed the top of her head. When Linda came back, she wasn't empty-handed. At first, I thought it was just a spoon or maybe a piece of trash she meant to throw away. But as she got closer, I saw the thin metal glinting between her fingers, a broken butter knife from the first-class meal trays, sharpened against something, the edge jagged and angry. She stopped beside us, standing far too close. Ava looked up, confused. I barely had time to react before Linda moved. Her arm came down fast, a jerking motion, and Ava screamed. The sound ripped through the cabin. I saw the blade flash once before everything dissolved into noise and panic. Ava's scream was the kind that turned heads before minds could register why. Her body jerked sideways in the seat, and her hand clutched at her side as a bloom of red began to spread through her shirt. I didn't think. I lunged across her, shoving Linda back with everything I had. The knife clattered to the floor, skidding beneath a row of seats. Linda stumbled but didn't fall. Her eyes were wide, mouth twisted into something that looked like satisfaction. Passengers screamed. One man near the back stood up and shouted for help. A woman pressed her call button again and again with a trembling hand. The flight attendants came rushing, their faces caught between panic and training. I pulled Ava into my arms, trying to block her from view, trying to stop the bleeding with my bare hands. Her tiny fingers clutched at my sleeve. She was crying, calling for me, voice cracked and terrified. 2 men from the row behind jumped up and tackled Linda before she could move again. She struggled, kicking, calling everyone liars. She said Ava had tried to hurt her, that she was defending herself. Her voice grew shrill, then hoarse, then quiet. One of the flight attendants grabbed handcuffs from the emergency kit and secured her wrists behind her back. They dragged her toward the back of the plane, while a group of passengers stood in shock, still unsure if it had really happened. I couldn't stop shaking. Blood soaked through my jeans where Ava leaned against me. Her eyes were squeezed shut, her breath short and uneven. I kept whispering to her that she was going to be okay, that I was here, that nothing else would happen. But my voice didn't sound like my own. It was thin and cracked and full of fear I couldn't hide. Someone handed me a compress. A flight attendant spoke into a phone, calling for medical assistance. I heard a garbled voice respond through the intercom. It was Mark. He was asking for details. He knew something had happened, but not what. I looked at Ava and knew I had to tell him before someone else did. His daughter had just been stabbed 30,000 feet in the air. The intercom clicked again, followed by a brief pause. Then his voice came through, steady but with an edge that wasn't usually there. "This is your captain speaking. We're experiencing a medical emergency in the main cabin. We are coordinating with the crew and diverting to the nearest airport for immediate assistance." Passengers murmured, some craning their necks to see what was going on. I could tell they didn't know it was him, didn't hear what I heard. His voice was composed, but I caught the strain beneath it, the cracks he was trying to smooth over. He had always been calm under pressure, but this was different. This wasn't turbulence or a faulty gauge. This was Ava. I asked for the handset. A flight attendant hesitated but saw the blood on my hands and nodded. She handed it to me and held my arm steady. "It's me," I said. "It's Ava. She's hurt. It's bad, Mark." There was silence for a beat. Then his voice came back, smaller, quieter. "What happened?" "She stabbed her, Linda Cartwright. She was on the plane. She brought something sharp. Ava's bleeding, but she's conscious. I'm trying to keep her awake." I heard a sharp breath on the other end. Then he was gone, probably switching channels, calling for the emergency landing, getting coordinates. I handed the phone back and cradled Ava closer. She was trembling. Her lips were pale. I pressed my forehead to hers and whispered that Daddy was flying the plane. He was going to land it fast. He was going to bring her home. The flight attendants moved with purpose now, their calm voices layered with urgency. One of them knelt beside me with a med kit, while another relayed updates to the cockpit. Someone else handed out wet towels and cleared the row around us. It felt like we were in a hospital wing and not a plane anymore, floating above the world with nowhere to go but down. Linda sat restrained near the back, her wrists bound and her mouth still running. I could hear her faintly over the hum of the engines, insisting she had been provoked, that she had done what was necessary. I turned in my seat, straining to see her, to make eye contact. I wanted her to feel it. I wanted her to know exactly what she had done. I stood up despite the protests of the flight attendant beside me. My hands were still sticky with Ava's blood. I didn't care. I took a step toward the aisle, ready to storm to the back, ready to make her hurt the way she had hurt my daughter. But the attendant caught my arm and said, "No, not now, not like this." I looked back at Ava, slumped against the seat, her head on a folded jacket. She needed me. I couldn't leave her, not even to spit in that woman's face. I sat back down and cradled her again, kissed her temple, whispered that Daddy was almost there. I whispered that Mommy was not going to let her go. Mark sat in the cockpit with his hand clenched around the yoke, his jaw tight, eyes flicking between the instruments and the radar screen. The co-pilot beside him was talking to the tower, confirming clearance for emergency landing, but Mark barely heard him. All he could see was Ava's face in his mind. The last time he saw her before takeoff, she was skipping through the terminal with a juice box, pointing at the planes out the window and asking if any of them were his. Now she was bleeding somewhere behind him, hurt, scared. He had always believed in staying composed in the air. No matter what went wrong, the passengers needed a pilot who was calm and in control. He had flown through lightning storms, instrument failures, even an engine fire once, and he never lost focus. But this was his daughter. This was Ava. He had 5 minutes to get them down. 5 minutes of airspace, flaps, hydraulics, and math. Every number on the screen felt like a countdown. He spoke clearly to the crew, instructing them to prep for hard descent, alert the cabin, and brace the passengers. His voice held steady even as the pressure inside him threatened to splinter. He didn't let himself picture the blood. He didn't let himself think about the knife or Linda or the way his wife's voice had cracked over the comm. He had one job now: land the plane, get to Ava. Every second mattered. The sky didn't care about panic. Neither did the ground. The plane began its descent faster than usual. Passengers gripped armrests and whispered prayers as the engines roared and the cabin tilted. I held Ava against me, feeling every dip, every vibration. Her breathing was shallow, but her eyes fluttered open once when I said her name. I told her we were almost there. I told her Daddy was landing the plane just for her. Through the window, the ground rose quickly. The airport came into view like a grey blur, the runway stretching out like a lifeline. I felt the wheels touch down hard, bouncing once before locking in with a sharp jolt. The plane slowed with a long screech that echoed through the fuselage. The second we stopped, the doors flew open, and emergency crews rushed aboard. Stretchers, uniforms, voices. A medic knelt beside me, gently lifting Ava from my arms. I wanted to go with her, but they asked me to wait. I watched as they carried her down the aisle, her little hand dangling from the edge of the blanket. I turned and saw Linda being led away too, flanked by 2 officers. Her face was calm, almost smug. I didn't speak. I just stared, daring her to look back. She didn't. The hospital waiting room smelled like bleach and old coffee. I sat in a stiff plastic chair, my shirt still stained with Ava's blood, hands clasped so tight they'd gone numb. A nurse had given me water I hadn't touched. Time passed strangely, stretched out and folding in on itself. Every time the door opened, I looked up too fast, hoping for someone in scrubs to say she was fine, that she was asking for me. Mark came in after what felt like hours. He wasn't wearing his uniform jacket anymore, just his undershirt and slacks, his eyes red around the edges. He crossed the room in 2 steps and sank beside me, pulling me into his arms without saying a word. I let myself fall into him. I let it all go. The fear, the anger, the helplessness I'd been holding back since the moment Linda's knife flashed. "She's stable," he whispered. "The doctor says she'll be okay." I nodded, but I couldn't speak yet. My throat was too full. We sat there like that for a long time, not moving, barely breathing. Somewhere in the building, Ava was sleeping under warm lights, stitched and bandaged, with beeping machines watching over her. I tried to picture her smiling again, singing to her unicorn, feet dangling from a seat that now felt so far away. I closed my eyes and waited for the strength to walk down the hall and be her mother again. The news broke before we even left the hospital. A local station picked up the story first, then it spread to national headlines within a day. HOA president attacks child mid-flight. Photos of Linda's mugshot appeared alongside grainy pictures of her at neighborhood meetings, usually pointing at something with a clipboard in hand. The contrast between her old, self-important expressions and the blank stare in her booking photo was almost surreal. She was charged with multiple felonies, including attempted murder. The federal charges came swiftly. Attacking a child on a commercial aircraft turned it into a case with serious weight. Her attorney tried to paint a picture of mental instability, stress, something about a breakdown. No one bought it. Too many witnesses. Too much blood. The court ordered a full psychiatric evaluation, but even that couldn't soften the public reaction. Back in the neighborhood, everything shifted. Some people came by with flowers and awkward apologies. Others sent letters, trying to distance themselves from her, pretending they hadn't cheered her on every time she issued another citation. The HOA board dissolved within 2 weeks. No one wanted to be associated with it anymore. I read somewhere that Linda was denied bail. She sat in a county facility awaiting trial, alone, away from her folders and laminated codes. I never saw her again, and I didn't want to. What she did was more than madness. It was malice wearing the mask of order. It had always been there. We just hadn't seen how far she'd go. We stayed home for a long time after that. Mark took leave from the airline, and I cancelled everything that wasn't necessary. Ava's recovery was slow, but steady. The stitches came out after 2 weeks. The physical wound healed faster than the rest. She clung to us at night, curled tight between us in bed, her unicorn always under one arm. Sometimes she would wake up crying. No words, just tears and shaking. We never asked her to explain. A therapist came twice a week. At first, Ava wouldn't speak during the sessions, only nod or draw pictures. Then one afternoon, she pointed to a crayon drawing of a plane and whispered that she didn't want to go high again. The therapist said that was a good start. Mark and I sat in the hallway and cried, our hands clasped like we were holding something fragile between them. Neighbors started waving when they saw us again. Some crossed the street just to say hello or ask how Ava was doing. I didn't trust all of it, but I nodded and thanked them anyway. It felt strange to be back in the world, walking the same sidewalks where chalk rainbows used to live. Ava drew one again eventually. Smaller this time, tucked near the porch steps. Mark stood beside her, watching. He didn't say much, but I could see something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. He would fly again, but not yet. For now, his place was here, with us, where things were finally starting to feel whole. It took nearly a year before Ava agreed to get back on a plane. We didn't push her. Every time we mentioned flying, she'd go quiet and change the subject. But one morning, she came into our room holding her little backpack and said she wanted to visit Aunt Kelly again. She looked nervous, but determined, and I saw a bit of the old sparkle in her eyes. We booked the flight for a quiet weekday. No crowds, no rush. Mark had gone back to flying part-time, and by chance, he was assigned to our route. The airline offered to reassign him, but Ava shook her head. She wanted her dad up there. She said if anything went wrong, he'd get her home. We packed snacks and coloring books, just like before, but this time she carried a small stuffed plane instead of her unicorn. At the gate, the staff gave her a plastic pilot's badge. She put it on proudly, adjusting it like it meant something sacred. I held her hand as we boarded. She didn't flinch when we walked down the aisle. She looked straight ahead and chose the window seat again. A few minutes after takeoff, the intercom clicked. "This is your captain speaking. We've got clear skies ahead and a very special passenger on board today. Ava, sweetheart, this flight's for you." She grinned so wide I thought her face might split. Her fingers tapped the window, and she whispered, "That's my daddy." I nodded and smiled too, my chest full of something bright and unshakable. This time, she wasn't afraid. This time, she knew who was flying.